Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. This week we are working on this piece right here. Believe it or not, that is part of a piece, and it's going to be the detail that I add to this piece. It's actually a few pieces that I'm going to use the same finish to bring them together and make them look like a matching set. This piece has kind of a fun story because it actually belonged to my sister's in-laws, and they've had it in their home for years. In fact, when I pulled it apart, I found newspaper in it from the 1950s. So this has been a family piece for them. I really want to do it justice and make it something that they remember fondly. So I am going to use my sprayer on this one. I've been trying to use my sprayer more. I want to do a really nice clean finish, but I want to transform this from a dated set to something that's a little more sleek and a little more modern. The color that we're going to use on this is absolutely beautiful. It's this really soft blue that's called Sea Salt from Wise Owl Paint. We're going to transform even some hardware. So I think overall, from where these started to where they're going to end is going to be absolutely beautiful, and I hope I do them justice for my sister's in-laws. So stick around. Let's get started. Here's where I started on these pieces. This is a style I don't pick up all that often. I'll call them colonial style. And they're really good quality pieces, but they're pretty plain front and boring. And so these I want to totally reimagine. This is a dresser and a nightstand that I got from my sister's in-laws. And then another piece that also matched this style that I already had in my inventory. I'm going to reimagine all three of these pieces into a matching set. The very first thing I want to do is remove all of this fluted skirting from the bottom. I feel like this is what makes the pieces overall look pretty dated. And so with a couple taps of the hammer at the bottom, you really need to look at how they're constructed, remove any screws that are holding this skirting on. And there were a few places that needed to be cut with a saw. For this, I marked off a straight line and then used an oscillating saw to remove any of those parts. This oscillating saw from DeWalt is an amazing tool. It's one of my most used tools that I have in my workshop. It's super convenient and you can cut into just about any space. Because these are three different pieces that I'm making a match set out of, each of them had different construction, and so each of them took something different to remove the skirting from the bottom. Overall, removing this skirting was not a super hard task and something that shouldn't intimidate you. Between the hammer, I used a screwdriver, a flat edge to get in as a chisel anywhere that I needed to. I made sure to score all of my veneer so that when I cut it with the saw, I got a nice clean edge on it. And then of course my saw, and between those few tools, it was really easy to get these pieces off. Once that skirting is removed from all three of these pieces, it's going to give them a really flat, level, even bottom. And it makes them overall pretty plain front pieces that I can take just about any direction with style. The other thing that I feel really dates these pieces is the hardware. So I knew right away the hardware that was on them originally is not going to be going back. I went ahead and put those in a bag, and I'm going to donate those to my local Habitat for Humanity for somebody else to try to use if they can. The other thing I'm looking at on the bottom of these when I'm taking them apart is how are they constructed underneath? Do they have a place where I can attach new legs that's going to be able to support the weight of the pieces? If not, you're going to need to build up some kind of support in the corners where they can hold the weight from the legs. You never want to attach your new legs into a flimsy piece of cardboard or anything from underneath. And so these had pretty good substance from underneath once I took this skirting off, so I didn't even need to build them up. Once all this skirting is off, I made sure to sand any areas that I had to cut with the saw so those are nice and clean and smooth. And the next thing I need to do is go ahead and give these a really good and thorough cleaning. I'm using Green Ease furniture cleaner on these, and then I'm going to rinse away any cleaning residue with some water. Like I had said, my hardware is not going back on these in the same way, and so I went ahead and filled all my hardware holes using some putty, and now I'm going to go ahead and scuff sand the front of the drawers and sand those places that I filled smooth. To scuff these up, I'm just using my Surf Prep sander and a 220 grit paper attached to it. I'm going to scuff over the fronts of all of my drawer fronts, and then I need to make sure that I scuff the entire bodies as well. With the bodies on these fully sanded, there were some places that I ended up going through the existing clear coat and I exposed the raw wood. And so I wanted to make sure that these don't bleed because I'm going to be using a really light paint color. So I knew that I needed to give these some primer. I'm going to use Wise Owl primer in light gray and go ahead and prime up any of these parts that are going to be painted. For these pieces, I am going to go ahead and spray my primer. Now this is going to take 2 coats, and this is my first coat going on using my Apollo paint sprayer. When I'm deciding whether to brush or to spray on a finish, I usually first look at, is it going to be multicolors? Am I going to need more than one product? If so, then that's one that needs to be brushed. In this case, this is just a solid, smooth, even finish with my primer, so I know that can be easily sprayed. Spraying does not tend to save much time over brushing. The only thing that you're doing is exchanging the time that you would usually spend brushing. Instead, you spend it loading and cleaning your sprayer instead. So while this part that you see here is actually pretty quick with the actual product going on, once I'm done, I need to clean my gun out. And then before, to load it up, I needed to dilute my product just slightly, make sure that I strain it. And that's the kind of stuff that you spend the time on when you're spraying. While my primer is drying, I had decided that I wanted to do a special treatment on the top drawers of these pieces, and so I went ahead and sanded them smooth using my Surf Prep stander. I started out with an 80 grit, then a 120, and then a 220 grit paper, and I got these nice and smooth down to raw wood. For any of the tight crevices, I first tried offsetting my paper just slightly to get into those, but anywhere that I couldn't reach with my power sander, I went ahead and took my sandpaper off, folded it in half, and then made sure to hand sand down in those tiny little crevices so those were free of my finish. Once I had these top drawers all down to raw wood, the finish that I want to add on to these is a stencil detail. So I'm going to use this Mid-Century Vibes stencil from Redesign with Prima. I sprayed my stencil on the back with a little bit of 3M Super 77 spray adhesive and then laid that in place. I'm going to be stenciling using Wise Owl Chalk Synthesis paint, and even though I'm going to be painting the bodies of these in Wise Owl 1 Hour enamel, I chose the Chalk Synthesis paint for my stenciling because it's slightly thicker than the 1 Hour enamel. I'm just going to dab this on into place, and then once I'm done, I can pull my stencil back and remove it and reveal my design. Any areas that I got paint onto once I was stenciling, I came back with a baby wipe and I just wiped that away while my paint was still fresh, and I got nice, clean, even edges all the way around my drawers. All of these top drawers had these dividing lines that made them look like individual smaller drawers, and I wanted to maintain that look. So I came back with a little artist brush and my Chalk Synthesis paint in my body color, and I filled those in by hand painting them. With my drawer treatment done, let's go ahead and get to work spraying the bodies of these pieces. So the colors I chose for all of this design is Wise Owl paint, and this color is called Sea Salt. It's this really soft blue. I'm going to start out by straining my paint right out of the container. I want to make sure that it runs through the strainer so there's no lumps or chunks that go through my paint sprayer. I do find that Wise Owl 1 Hour enamel sprays best when I dilute it, just about 10%, and then I stir that water into my paint, and I'm going to go ahead and fill my paint sprayer. This is just part of the process that makes it take a little bit longer when you're going through spraying, because I needed to do that straining, I needed to add the water, stir it, get my sprayer all set up, and then I can go ahead and load this into my Apollo gun. The Apollo is really easy to use. Once I have it in the container, I'm going to take it over and I just attach it to my sprayer hose. It just clicks on to the end, and then I'm going to practice first on a piece of cardboard. You always want to do this to make sure you've got your sprayer settings right before you go to town on your piece of furniture. Once I feel like I'm comfortable with that, I'm going to go ahead and move this cardboard aside and start spraying my furniture piece. I hold my gun about 8 to 10 inches away from my piece of furniture, and I'm going to slightly overlap from one coat down to the next so that my passes just slightly overlap each other. You also never want to stop your passes in the middle of your piece when you're spraying. You always want to make sure you pass across the entire front and only stop the gun when you're on the edges of the piece. I do spray with my drawers inside the piece. The coats on this are so thin that I spray with the drawers in, and once that's done, I go ahead and pull those out and I'll touch up my spray around the edge of my body, and I find that it comes out looking perfectly fine. These pieces are going to need 2 coats of paint, and so I went ahead and let my paint dry to the touch, and I came back in about a half an hour and I resprayed these again with a second coat. I did not clean my gun out in between. I waited until I was done with my second coat to go ahead and clean this out. I ended up using about 3/4 of my quart of paint on these, which is a heck of a great spray. The Apollo sprayer really has minimal overspray in comparison with a lot of paint sprayers. So with my paint on these looking beautiful, these are almost done. I have these knobs in my stash and I wanted to use them, but when I held them up to my light blue paint, I found that the white of the natural stone looked kind of dirty. And so I want to go ahead and pour these with resin so they match my body color. This is largely where the expense of these pieces went in. So I find that when I need to replace all my hardware like this, including attaching legs, this can be a big expense. So you want to make sure that you account for this when you're redoing pieces that include a lot of extra hardware. These knobs were great to pour resin into because they had this little bezel around the edge and it actually had a little lip, so I didn't need to tape them off or anything. I used amazing clear cast resin. I went ahead and mixed up equal parts of A and B and a little tiny drop of my Wiesel chalk synthesis paint in my body color. Resin does have a very low tolerance for water-based paints, but you can use them to dye your resin if you use very little. And then I just drizzled in a little bit of resin that was dyed in white, and this gave me the look of a marbleized finish. I did find that my knobs weren't perfectly level in the box, and so I used some clamps and just held those up so they could dry overnight. Here's the finished results. I absolutely love how these turned out, so don't be afraid to reimagine your hardware. Let's go ahead and reimagine some that I'm going to be using on those top drawers that I added the stencil to. I bought these off Amazon, and I'm using a helper here to go ahead and sand the existing finish to scuff these up and get them ready to accept some spray paint. Once these have been good and scuffed, I went ahead and primed these using a spray primer, and then I sprayed them with a gold spray paint. The paint on my body is nice and dry, and so I'm ready to go ahead and attach the legs that I got. I got these from Amazon as well. These are going to be available in the description for this post. And I'm just going to attach these using screws to the underside. Now you remember I said earlier that you want to make sure that you've got substance to the body of your piece that can hold the weight from the legs. These were nice and built up underneath, so I was able to just screw the legs right into them. This is just one style leg, but you can imagine there's any different style of legs that you can put on the bottoms of pieces like this to completely change the look. My primer is dry, and here's the spray paint going onto those top knobs. This is a gloss gold. I went ahead and screwed these into those top drawers with the stencils. I added some cut up bits of paper so they look like genuine labels, and these pieces are complete. Here's the finished product, all nice and staged. I just staged them using some gold frames. I placed some soft pink flowers into a gold vase, and that was all I used for staging on these. I'm going to keep it fairly simple. This set is completely modernized. You can see how we totally transformed this style by removing that skirting from the bottom, a little bit of new hardware, and this clean, sleek finish. You can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. As always, you can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushbybrandy.com. And don't forget to click that subscribe button for a weekly tutorial here on YouTube.